You noble diggers, all stand up now.
Hello my friends, welcome to my channel. Today we will be starting a new series, a spin-off of our Bash the Fash series, and it will be called Bash Lib Trash. I was thinking about my thought process to adopt Sam Seder's logic, and I was wondering why he doesn't attack more liberal commentators more often. He often attacks people like CNN, right? But there's no bread tube, there's no discourse on the internet trying to establish the narrative. And Sam is, he likes to joke that Ben Shapiro's the Pope of the Jews because he calls Sam not a real Jew. But Sam is the Pope of the left, right? He's been at this so long, he is so important, he has such reach that he gets to decide these things. But, he's not really on the left, he's a liberal. He classically a liberal. He wants intervention only so far as it negotiates peace with reality. He has a sense of justice, but it is often mired by his willingness to compromise. I was a huge fan of Michael Brooks, but he's passed, and Emma Vigeland is to the right of Sam, so the show's just not really worth it. But today, I'm going to be not bashing on them. I'm going to be bashing a different liberal YouTuber by the name of Luke Beasley. I saw Luke talk. I've seen Luke talk a lot about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and he knows nothing. He knows nothing at all about the conflict. He's got 1.6 million subscribers. He's a child, right? A child. Never went to school, just had the audacity, the narcissism to start talking into a camera when he was barely out of puberty. And now he's got an audience that high priests throughout history could only dream of. It's ridiculous. It's patently absurd, right? And before I start in on him, really start in on him, I wanted to talk about, I wanted to talk to the reactionaries who might view this video. I'm not on your side, right? I'm attacking Luke from the left. I believe liberals should be beaten in argument in good faith, but conservatives are animals, right? You're not human. You are to be crushed in argument. You are to be made an example of. The argument is not for you. I might be able to convince a liberal. I could only convince the audience when fighting a fascist, right? Fascists don't care for the rules of argumentation. The famous quote from the Italian parliament when fascism was new was, "I don't give a damn," right? They like to lie. They like to be perfidious, right? You got to be big chimp. You have to be stronger than them. You have to beat on them. You have to show them and the public that they're weak. And that's what beats them, not ridicule, beating them. And so I just wanted to say that because I know that there's a very viral moment of Luke Beasley going up against Tim Pool, and then another viral moment of Tim Pool and that scum Myron talking about the moment, just completely delusional, no attachment to reality. But you can tell that they didn't think they lost because they didn't get embarrassed, because Luke fights improperly against fascists. It's the same problem with that Mehdi Hassan viral moment that just happened. Mehdi went against 20 reactionaries and tried to reach an accord with them, right? Tried to be cordial with them. These are not people, right? They're animals. They're to be beaten. They're to be destroyed. They are pests, pestilence. They are anti-human, right? These are Nazis. Anyways, I think that's enough for that. Moving on. Luke was talking about Russia, right? The Russia-Ukraine war, and he knows nothing about it. He knows nothing about Russia. He knows nothing about imperialism. He knows nothing about war, and yet he just sits there and talks about it. He knows nothing about economy. It's so sad, right? It's so sad that he has such a large platform. First, he says that Putin wants to expand the borders because the Soviet Union or whatever. He says, or whatever.
Doing just because he wants glory and more land and more resources and has this sort of view of the Soviet Union coming back or whatever. But
right? First, Putin does not want to reintroduce the Soviet Union. Direct quote. Any man who does not miss the Soviet Union has no heart, but anyone who wants to bring it back has no head. Vladimir Putin, right? He doesn't want to bring the Soviet Union back. He wants to defend the Russian people. If you open Wikipedia, this is a bit I'm stealing directly from Norman Finkelstein. If you open Wikipedia of Vladimir Putin, his entire family, his two brothers, his uncles, his grandfather, all exterminated by the Nazis, right? Died in a war of extermination. He grew up with those pictures on the mantle. He thought about them constantly. He is worried about another war that will claim proportionally 27 million Russians in today's climate, right? 27 million before nukes, before biological weapons. That's 27 million total Soviets. I'm mixing counts there. I think it's like 23 million Russians and Belarusians. And, that brings me to my second point, right? That Luke doesn't really know the history of the area. The Russians are a civilization disguised as a nation state. The people of Russia claim to be the true inheritor of the Roman Empire, right? And if you look at the history of the area, it is not as absurd as it is superficially, right? They were part of the Commonwealth of the Greek hegemony in the area following the Great Roman-Persian War. Yeah, it was Sasanians. And then the conquest by the early Arab Ummah, the Rashidun Caliphates. The Russians were a people who appear out of the forests, basically, right? They were called the Sklavani and other tribes, and they spread out over a massive, massive area, pushing the Germans west, who used to cover a lot more of the North European plain. And that was after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So from like 400 to 650, these people expand to the modern borders of Slavic countries today. And the Russians themselves, right, were the most eastern tribe, the tribe that didn't go west. And so they didn't have the contact with civilization. And instead, civilization came from the north. It went west, up north, and then down into Russia. And this is, of course, the Kievan Rus, right? These Swedish Vikings that gave statehood to the princedoms of Russia. And this is what gives rise to Kievan Rus, right? Kiev was the heart of all Rusdom at one point. And this lasted until the Mongols, right? And the Mongols are the most important world historical event for understanding imperialism, Western hegemony. Everything flows from the Mongols. Europe only advanced because the Mongols didn't get them like they did everybody else. But anyways, the area that is Ukraine now, besides the very most western portions, right, which was called Galicia and Volhynia at that time, were completely depopulated. They were only populated by Tatars and Turks and Mongols. And eventually, when the Mongol yoke was thrown off by Russians from the area of Moscow, I think it was Novgorod still at that point, but still, right? The Mongol yoke was thrown off by Russians, and the entire eastern half of Ukraine was settled by Russians. And so when this conflict was starting to kick up in the early 2000s to 2010s, the Ukrainian government had decided to enforce Ukrainian language and religion on the eastern oblasts, which were majority Russian, right? And not only that, it is not as clear-cut as it is made out to be. As a legacy of the Soviet Union, Russian is the lingua franca of the area. And so all the urban centers were really Russian, right? Maybe Kiev and some far western ones weren't, but most of the urban centers throughout the country were majority Russian speakers, because even calling them Russians and Ukrainians is kind of hard, because the East Slav language is so interchangeable that it's hard to call them different languages. The Western propaganda wants Russian and Belarus to be one country, right? And they are. They're going to be united by 2030, I think is the official plan. But then they'll say Belarusian and Ukrainian and Russian and Ukrainian are not interchangeable. It is all for the ends of the CIA, right? And that brings us to imperialism. It's American imperialism, right? We have pushed past the borders of East Germany. We have provoked Russia. A defensive alliance against whom, right? It is a defensive alliance against Russia. And so they felt provoked, they felt encircled, they felt the fear, the cultural, in their lifetime memory of 20 million people dying. Can you imagine the post-traumatic stress? Can you imagine the anger? I don't think you can. And so they did feel provoked. They felt that they had to, and because we provoked them so badly, we've sacrificed these Ukrainians for no reason, right? And we're never getting these oblasts back. The only way we could do that is to declare to Russia that we're going to, raise all of NATO as a levy and go clear them out by hand, right? No, basically no air support, basically no nukes, no nuclear whatsoever, and then we'd have to stop 6 kilometers short of the Ukrainian border to make it clear that we are on the right side of history, and that's just not going to happen, right? I will never be able to get the Congress to vote to send me and your brothers and your sons to war, and nor do I want them to, right? But I would have preferred that we didn't sacrifice these Ukrainians needlessly. I feel the war will end, as I'm about to describe. The Russians will go all the way to the Dnieper and probably sack Kiev, and whatever rump state is left over in the West will join the EU, which will de facto make it a part of NATO. And also up for grabs is Odessa on the southwest, which would link the Russians to their other Russian peoples, the satellite state in Moldavia. I think Moldavia. But the point is that war is a serious matter, right? And it sucks that this liberal kid gets to just talk about it, right? He just talks about it and he has no idea what's going on. He can't even attempt the names because he's not literate enough. I'll give him Eastern Slavic names are tough, right? I find anyone with a bunch of Y's tricky, right? But the name here was Reshetnikov, right?
Sir, don't even think you're going to get a attempt out of this name for me. I'm not even going to try. Well, Luke, actually, I'm not even going to try this time, but Maxim, who warned.
And also in the article he was reading, he blended the quote with the analysis to make it feel like reality. The Russian foreign minister is warning of recession, right? But then he includes the analysis from the Western media that says a serious economic downturn.
But also, he can't believe that because his economy wouldn't be seeing the troubling signs, even though, as happens during war, there was a big boost in growth because of you kick it into gear in the defense industry, and that can fuel things for a period of time. But once that pulls back, you pull that sort of like blanket off, and what's under there is pretty nasty. And so it's not good.
A recession is not a serious economic downturn. It's a bad thing. It shouldn't happen. And it's dangerous for one's political fortunes as a leader like Putin, but it's not the end of the world, and especially not when the Russian people are so behind this war. I don't think people understand how behind this war the Russian people are. I think it's like 70 or 80% support, right? They don't do that out of nowhere. Getting 70 or 80% of people to agree on anything would be crazy. And maybe that's a bad argument because the Nazis, but I don't think the war enthusiasm was ever this high while the war went that bad. Maybe the war enthusiasm was this high in 41, but in 43, 44, 39? No way. But the Russians know this to be a sacred duty in their own mind, right? I don't see it as a sacred duty, but they do. And the mirage that Putin is losing this war is just that, a mirage. He's worried about the next fight. He's worried about the Iranians becoming strong. He's worried about the Chinese stabbing him in his back. He is trying to win this fight as efficiently as possible, and he's winning. He's winning very well. Don't trust the Western media. You know, they've lied throughout. They were talking about Russia will lose in 2 weeks. I knew they wouldn't. They make 100 million tons of steel. They make 100 million tons of grain. They had 40,000 near modern tanks, and all tanks are equal in the age of the anti-tank missile. So they're never going to run out. They've learned the lesson, and their new assault tanks have no turret on the top, and so they're basically invulnerable to those to the last strat where we would sink the anti-tank missile between the turret slat and light the ammunition up. The Russians get better when they go to war, and they have gotten better. There's something like 3 million men under arms right now, which is incredible, a huge army. We can't do what the CIA set out to do, right? Which is to destroy Russia. The constituent republics of Russia would break apart into this vast ocean of semi-independent states that cooperated with Europe and NATO. And it's just not doable, right? It would have happened on its own had we not provoked this fight. But now you've given them Crimea, you've given them a land bridge to Crimea, you've given them the resources under the Ukraine, you've given them food dominance in the time of huge climate upheaval, which will prove to be a strategic boon like no other. We have failed precipitously fighting these Russians. We failed in thought from the outset.